In February 1960, beneath the gilded ceilings of Buckingham Palace, a prince entered history. Prince Andrew arrived as the third child and second son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, a family bound not just by blood, but by centuries of tradition. He was not the heir. He was not destined for the crown. That role belonged to his older brother, Charles III. But in royal families, proximity to power can shape a life as much as power itself. Andrew grew up in a world few ever see, corridors lined with portraits of monarchs, formal dinners steeped in protocol, and a childhood watched by a nation that felt it owned a piece of him. Confident, spirited, bold, he carried himself with an ease that contrasted sharply with the restrained introspection of his older brother. Royal life, however, was never just about personality. It was about duty. As Britain entered the 1970s, the country itself was changing. The empire had faded. The economy wavered. The monarchy faced a new media age, one where tradition offered no shield. Andrew chose a path that would define his early years: the military. He entered the Royal Naval College, training as a helicopter pilot. For generations, royal men had worn uniform, a symbol of service, of standing shoulder to shoulder with ordinary citizens in times of national need. Then, in 1982, history called. The Falklands War erupted between Britain and Argentina. At just 22, Andrew served aboard HMS Invincible. While debate would later swirl over the exact level of risk he faced, the public saw one undeniable truth: a son of the Queen was on the front lines. Overnight, his image transformed. He was no longer simply a privileged prince. He was a young man in uniform, standing with his country in war. Newspapers plastered his photograph across their front pages. Brave, dutiful, visible proof that royalty could serve, not just symbolize. For a time, he became one of the most popular members of the royal family. That goodwill carried him into the next chapter, one that captivated the world. In 1986, Andrew married Sarah Ferguson in a grand ceremony at Westminster Abbey. Vibrant, unconventional, charismatic, she brought energy to a tradition-bound institution. The press adored her, at least at first. Together, they were Fergie and Andrew, a modern royal couple who shook the stoic image of the monarchy with unpredictability and charm. Millions tuned in to watch their wedding, a fairy tale spectacle that seemed to reaffirm the monarchy's place in a rapidly modernizing world. But palace life is rarely simple. Behind gilded walls, pressures mounted, public scrutiny intensified. By the early 1990s, the House of Windsor faced turbulence. Andrew and Sarah separated in 1992 and divorced in 1996. Though they maintained cooperation for their daughters, the collapse of their marriage mirrored a broader crisis and a period famously described by the Queen as an annus horribilis. Yet Andrew's personal popularity endured. He carried himself with confidence, retained military titles, and continued public engagements. The second son, not burdened by kingship, seemed secure within the royal framework. History, however, has a way of shifting quietly before it shifts loudly. As the 21st century dawned, Andrew stepped into a new role, not on battlefields, but on the global stage. He was appointed the United Kingdom's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment, a position that placed him at the intersection of politics, diplomacy, and business. It expanded his network, connecting him to some of the world's most powerful figures. At first, it appeared a natural evolution, a prince leveraging privilege to serve British interests abroad. But proximity to wealth and influence can cast long shadows. Questions began quietly. About judgment, about associations, about choices that would shape public perception. The prince who once symbolized youthful service and steady duty was entering a far more complicated chapter. A chapter where privilege would meet scrutiny. A chapter where reputation, carefully built over decades, would face its greatest test. Because in the modern world, association can become destiny. And soon, those associations would define him. Everything was about to change. By the early 2000s, Prince Andrew was no longer defined by naval uniforms or royal wedding photographs. He had entered a different arena, boardrooms instead of battlefields. Private. Jets instead of naval carriers. Closed-door meetings instead of ceremonial parades. In 2001, he was appointed the United Kingdom's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment. On paper, the role was straightforward: promote British business abroad, strengthen diplomatic ties, and open doors that only royalty could open. And Andrew knew how to open doors. As the second son of the reigning monarch, he carried something more valuable than political office: access. Presidents took his calls. Billionaires hosted him at private estates. Heads of state welcomed him with red carpets and military honors. He traveled extensively: the Middle East, Asia, Europe, the United States. His days were packed with high-level meetings. Photographs captured him shaking hands with global leaders, standing beside corporate executives, smiling confidently at trade conferences. Supporters argued he was effective. Critics began to ask questions, because the line between diplomacy and influence is thin. Andrew operated in spaces where wealth and power often overlap: private dinners, exclusive gatherings, luxury properties. For some government officials, this was part of the job. For others, it began to look excessive. Media scrutiny followed. Travel expenses were examined. Funding sources for trips questioned. Newspapers started probing the nature of certain connections, particularly with one controversial figure, a financier, a man with elite links across politics, academia, and business: Jeffrey Epstein. At first, their association did not dominate headlines. Epstein moved comfortably in powerful circles, hosting influential guests in New York, Florida, and the Caribbean. Photographs surfaced of Andrew and Epstein together. There were reports of visits, meetings, and shared acquaintances. At the time, Andrew's office stated that he met Epstein through mutual contacts and that their interactions were limited to social occasions. But as Epstein's legal troubles became public, including a 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor, the attention intensified. Why maintain any association after that? Why remain in contact? Questions that might once have faded instead multiplied. In Britain, members of Parliament voiced concerns. Trade officials quietly distanced themselves. Human rights groups questioned the optics of certain meetings. Across the Atlantic, investigative journalists began mapping Epstein's network, tracing connections across continents. And with each report, Andrew's name resurfaced. Inside Buckingham Palace, the response was measured. No dramatic moves, no public confrontations. The monarchy has weathered crises for centuries with silence and patience, but the pressure was building. By 2011, amid mounting criticism, Andrew stepped down from his trade envoy role. Official statements described it as a decision made in the best interest of his duties and the government. Yet the narrative had shifted. He was no longer simply the war-serving prince turned trade ambassador. He was becoming a figure surrounded by controversy. Public perception split. Some argued he was being unfairly targeted, guilty by association. Others insisted judgment matters, especially for someone born into privilege and influence. In the age of transparency, associations are rarely neutral, and as the years passed, the story deepened. In 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again on federal charges related to sex trafficking of minors. Global media attention exploded. The case was no longer confined to old headlines, front-page news, televised analysis, international outrage, and once again, questions turned to Prince Andrew. What exactly was the nature of their relationship? What did he know? When did he know it? For the first time, the scrutiny felt existential. Not just for Andrew, but for the institution he represented. The British monarchy depends on public trust, the belief that it stands above scandal, above politics, above impropriety. Now, one of its senior members was drawn directly into an international criminal investigation. The tone shifted from curiosity to urgency, from whispers to demands. Silence risked appearing evasive. Engagement risked intensifying the spotlight. And in the center of it all stood Prince Andrew, confident in public appearances, yet surrounded by mounting pressure. The stage was set for a moment that would define his public life more than any military service, more than any diplomatic handshake. A single decision, an interview, a televised attempt to explain. What followed would not only alter his own future, it would send shockwaves through the monarchy itself. By late 2019, the pressure was no longer building quietly, it was roaring. In the United States, federal prosecutors had charged Jeffrey Epstein with sex trafficking of minors. His arrest reignited global scrutiny, not just into Epstein's past, but into the powerful figures who had once moved within his orbit. Among the most prominent names was Prince Andrew. Photographs circulated worldwide. One image became emblematic. Andrew standing beside Epstein, smiling casually in what appeared to be a private setting. Another showed him with a young woman, later identified as Virginia Giuffre, who alleged she had been trafficked by Epstein and forced into encounters with powerful men, including Andrew. Andrew has consistently and firmly denied those allegations. But denial alone could not quiet the storm. In the United Kingdom, the media intensified investigations. In the United States, networks dissected every detail. Commentators debated the monarchy's silence. Lawmakers asked whether Andrew would cooperate with American authorities. The story had moved beyond association. It had become a question of accountability. Then came the decision that would define this chapter. In November 2019, Prince Andrew agreed to a televised interview with BBC Newsnight. The interviewer was Emily Maitlis, a rare move for a senior royal, direct, unscripted engagement. With allegations of this magnitude, the goal, reportedly, was to clarify his position, to explain, to put the matter to rest. Instead, the interview became a turning point. For nearly an hour, Andrew answered questions about his relationship with Epstein, the infamous photograph, and Giuffre's allegations. He claimed he had no recollection of meeting her. He defended his decision to maintain contact with Epstein after the 2008 conviction, describing it as a mistake, one he believed could be resolved honorably. But many of his responses sparked immediate backlash. He offered detailed explanations. Timelines, context, yet viewers felt the tone lacked empathy. Across social media, clips spread like wildfire. Analysts called it a public relations disaster. Headlines framed it as a defining misstep. Within hours, what was intended as a defense became fuel. Public opinion shifted. In Britain, skepticism deepened. In the United States, outrage intensified. Even within royal circles, concern mounted. The monarchy depends on public trust, and that trust was eroding in real time. Days later, Andrew announced he would step back from public duties for the foreseeable future. The statement was brief, but its implications were enormous. A senior member of the royal family, once celebrated as a war-serving prince and global trade envoy, was effectively withdrawing from public life amid scandal. Military patronages were suspended. Charities distanced themselves. Corporate associations reconsidered ties. Buckingham Palace confirmed he would no longer represent the Queen in official capacities. For the first time, Andrew's role within the monarchy seemed fundamentally altered. Meanwhile, in the United States, prosecutors sought his cooperation in ongoing investigations. Andrew's legal team stated he had offered assistance through appropriate channels. But public narratives rarely wait for legal processes. They are shaped by perception, by optics, by emotion, and the optics were stark. A prince, a convicted sex offender, a photograph that refused to disappear. As 2019 turned into 2020, the scandal no longer felt temporary. It felt structural. It raised uncomfortable questions about privilege, about access, about how proximity to power can insulate or expose. Epstein's death in custody in August 2019 only deepened the uncertainty. With the financier gone, many avenues for answers seemed closed. Yet the broader investigation continued. For Andrew, the path forward grew narrower. He was no longer a working royal, no longer a public ambassador. He was a figure defined by controversy, suspended between legal process and public judgment, and, as lawsuits began to take shape in American courts, one thing became clear. This story was not ending with a single interview. It was entering an entirely new phase. A phase that would test not just his reputation, but his place within the royal family itself. And the question lingered, was this a temporary retreat or the beginning of permanent exile? After the interview, the shift was immediate, not loud, not dramatic, but decisive. Prince Andrew no longer appeared on balconies during national celebrations, no longer represented the crown at official engagements, no longer traveled the world under royal banners. He had stepped back from public duties, but the fallout was only beginning. In early 2022, Buckingham Palace announced that Andrew would return his honorary military affiliations and royal patronages to Elizabeth II. He would no longer use the style His Royal Highness in any official capacity. It was an extraordinary moment. Titles and patronages are more than ceremonial. They symbolize trust, continuity, and royal endorsement. Their removal signaled something deeper. Institutional distance. The monarchy was drawing a line. At the same time, a civil lawsuit filed in the United States by Virginia Giuffre moved forward. She alleged that Andrew had sexually assaulted her when she was 17, claims he continued to categorically deny. The case unfolded under intense international scrutiny. Legal teams filed motions. Arguments were made. Andrew's lawyers sought dismissal. In January 2022, a U.S. judge ruled the case could proceed to trial. The pressure escalated. For the monarchy, this was uncharted territory. A senior royal facing a civil trial in the United States. Global headlines framed it as a constitutional embarrassment. Public opinion polls in the UK reflected declining support for Andrew. In the US, where the Epstein scandal had deeply unsettled, the public commentary was often unforgiving. Then, in February 2022, a settlement was announced. Andrew agreed to resolve the lawsuit without admitting liability. The agreement included a financial settlement and a statement expressing regret for his association with Epstein. The legal case ended before trial, but reputationally, the damage lingered. There was no courtroom verdict, no dramatic legal climax. Instead, there was silence, a quiet retreat. Andrew largely withdrew from public view. He was rarely photographed. Public appearances became limited and carefully managed. When Elizabeth II passed in September 2022, Andrew reappeared during the mourning period. Cameras captured him walking behind the Queen's coffin alongside other senior royals. For a moment, sympathy flickered. A son grieving his mother. But even then, his role was distinct. He wore civilian clothing during certain ceremonial events, a visible reminder that his military titles had been removed. The symbolism was unmistakable. When Charles III ascended the throne, questions arose about Andrew's future under the new reign. Would there be a path back, or would distance become permanent? Reports suggested internal restructuring, a slimmed-down royal family, focused on fewer working members. In that model, Andrew had no clear place. Financial questions surfaced too. Without official duties, how would he fund his lifestyle? Media speculation swirled around security costs, property arrangements, and long-term stability. While many details remained private, the broader picture was clear. Contraction, from global envoy to isolated royal. From public confidence to public doubt. In the United States, Andrew's name continued to appear in documentaries, investigative reports, and retrospectives examining the Epstein case. For many, he became a symbol, not only of personal controversy, but of institutional vulnerability. The British monarchy has survived abdications, divorces, wars, and scandal. But modern scrutiny is relentless. There is no fading quietly into history. Digital archives preserve every headline, every photograph, Every interview clip, Andrew's public identity became frozen in time, defined less by naval service or trade diplomacy and more by association and controversy. He remained a member of the royal family, but no longer at its center, no longer, even at its visible edge. Instead, he occupied a liminal space, present yet peripheral. As years passed, a deeper question surfaced. Beyond legal settlements, beyond titles, beyond public appearances. What would history remember? The decorated naval officer, the confident royal envoy, or the prince whose associations reshaped his legacy? As the monarchy moves forward into a new era, Andrew's story lingers like a shadow at the edge of the frame, not fully resolved, not fully forgotten, and leaving behind a question that extends far beyond one individual. What does accountability truly mean when power and tradition collide? The British monarchy has endured for more than 1,000 years. It has survived civil war, abdication, political upheaval, world wars, and cultural revolutions. It has adapted, sometimes reluctantly, to a world that demands transparency over mystique. And now, in the 21st century, it faces a different kind of test. The story of Prince Andrew is no longer just about one man. It is about what happens when ancient institutions meet modern accountability. For much of his life, Andrew embodied royal continuity. A son of Elizabeth II, a brother to Charles III, a naval officer who served during the Falklands War, a public figure who once stood confidently on the global stage. But legacy is fragile. It can be reshaped by a single era, and in Andrew's case, that era was defined not by service, but by association, scrutiny, and withdrawal. The monarchy today operates in a climate radically different from the one Andrew was born into in 1960. Back then, deference shielded royalty. Today, social media dissects it. Global news cycles amplify it. Documentaries revisit it. The public no longer consumes royal narratives passively. It interrogates them. For younger generations, questions of privilege, transparency, and accountability are not abstract concepts. They are central expectations. And this is where Andrew's story intersects with something larger. What does public trust mean in a constitutional monarchy? The crown does not govern directly. Its power is symbolic, ceremonial, dependent on perception. If the public believes the institution stands above reproach, it endures. If that belief fractures, pressure builds. In the aftermath of the scandal, Buckingham Palace moved decisively to protect the institution. Titles were returned, duties withdrawn, distancing made visible. It was a reminder that the monarchy's survival often requires sacrifice, even when that sacrifice involves one of its own. Yet redemption remains a complex question. Can a public figure redefine their narrative after controversy of this magnitude? History offers mixed answers. Some scandals fade, others become permanent footnotes. Andrew has largely remained out of public life, appearing only at major family events. He has not returned to official duties. There has been no formal rehabilitation. Instead, there is a quiet stasis. For supporters, he remains a father, a veteran, a man who denies the allegations made against him. For critics, he represents a cautionary tale about power, judgment, and proximity to influence. But perhaps the more enduring story is what this moment revealed. About the monarchy itself, it revealed vulnerability. It revealed that even centuries-old institutions must respond to public pressure. It revealed that reputation, once damaged, cannot be repaired through silence alone. As King Charles III shapes the next chapter of the royal family, there is clear emphasis on modernization, efficiency, and restoring confidence. A slimmed-down monarchy, fewer working royals, sharper accountability. In that future, Andrew's role appears limited, perhaps permanently, and so we are left with an image that feels almost cinematic. A prince born into privilege, a young officer flying helicopters in wartime skies, a confident envoy shaking hands with global elites, a man seated across from a journalist under harsh studio lights, and finally, a figure walking quietly behind his mother's coffin, no longer central to the institution he once represented so prominently. History rarely offers clean endings. It offers perspective. Prince Andrew's story is not one of clear triumph or simple downfall. It is a story about how power intersects with responsibility, about how institutions protect themselves, about how public trust can shift in an instant, and perhaps most importantly, it is a reminder that in the modern world, no title is immune to scrutiny. The monarchy will continue, the crown will endure, but the questions raised during this chapter will echo for years to come. Because legacy is not only built by birthright, it is built by choices. And once history records those choices, they become part of something far larger than any single prince.